This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Ian. First of all, thanks so much for joining me today to the podcast. Before we kick things off, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ean Mikale, and my journey in the automotive industry has been shaped by a strong foundation in AI, autonomous vehicles, quantum computing, and standards generation. As the principal engineer of Infinite A Industries and the creative of the Infinite Hybrid Quantum Internet Layer, I've been at the forefront of integrating cutting-edge technologies into various sectors, including automotive. My experience extends to serving on the IEEE Working Group for Autonomous Vehicles, the IEEE Industry Group for a hybrid quantum-inspired internet protocol, while also leading the development of national and local healthcare and AI standards. I also led the firm to the semifinals of the Global Automotive and Mobility Challenge in 2021.
Sounds super interesting. I've also seen that you work with a number of renowned firms. Before we delve deeper into the topic of today, which is, of course, generative AI in the context of the automotive industry, what are some of the wider trends you currently see in the automotive industry, maybe with regards to GenAI, but maybe also beyond?
Sure. And so you see the industry definitely advancing. Generative AI is helping engineers to solve previously intractable problems. The electrification of vehicles is also causing immense stress on top of the existing potential grid overload caused by artificial intelligence. Also, you have the integration of quantum computing, which is set to revolutionize data processing speed and optimizing different tasks and security, which will potentially allow automotive makers to feel more at ease by allowing third-party development and also enhanced in-cabin experiences due to allowing more advanced technology closer to the driver.
There are a couple of topics I would like to pick up on in a moment. You mentioned new problems, you mentioned quantum computing, but zooming out a little bit and looking at generative AI in the context of the automotive industry more widely, what developments have you seen in terms of how these big incumbents in the industry, whether original equipment manufacturers or suppliers or technology providers, tackle Gen AI as a whole on the organizational level?
So essentially, you have your traditional players, but also you have your semiconductor manufacturers that are getting further into the automotive vertical by providing not only hardware, but also software and other automated services that blend into that automotive experience. And so essentially automotive makers are having to do less and less in-house R&D when it comes to a lot of these more advanced technologies that are integrating not only into the in-cabin experience, but also the various sensors and other aspects of the vehicle.
Initially, you mentioned that Gen AI allows automotive manufacturers to tackle new problems, or in some cases, maybe also tackle existing problems in a new way. I was just wondering, what were some of these problems you were thinking about where automotive companies could potentially leverage Gen AI to do things more efficient and more effectively?
So you have essentially the prototyping process. So because you can use generative AI to not only automate the creation of the various models and designs, but also you can utilize generative AI to rapidly create any number of potential scenarios in order to simulate, whether it be simulating just mathematically or numerically, or whether you're actually using virtual worlds in order to rapidly create these worlds and to simulate infinite potential as far as different circumstances. And so in addition to that, you also have the supply chain and the optimization aspect of being able to rapidly determine the most optimal pathway for a particular automotive part. Also, you have going all the way to the manufacturing process where you're using generative AI in the defect recognition and prevention pipeline. And so you have a number of use cases where it appears to be saving money and helping to provide further and increased optimization.
Mhm. It's super interesting. And of course, one of the prominent players in the GenAI space more widely is OpenAI with their ChatGPT tool, which launched quite a while ago. And yet we still don't see really any use cases amongst the incumbent automotive OEMs on sort of a larger scale, especially when it gets to sort of customer and customer facing use cases. I was just wondering, why do you think that is? Or turning the question around, what do you think could be some of the challenges that automotive incumbents face when tackling the Gen AI problem?
So I guess I'll start with the more positive and optimistic outlook.
Yeah.
And so with an example, we have Mercedes, which is utilizing large language models to train the essentially base models on the history of the vehicle, utilizing all of the various manuals and other resources that they have. And so being able to allow a customer to have dialogue and to ask the vehicle questions concerning maintenance or any other issues or errors that may come up is saving a tremendous amount of time, energy, and resources when you think about that whole pipeline of human capital that are needed when a person possibly lost a manual, right? And I'm sure we could easily quantify those savings. So there's small and subtle things that have a big impact that can be done utilizing this particular technology to automate certain processes.
Mhm. Just building on that, are there any use cases in other industries that you believe automotive companies should be learning from or could potentially even adopt?
Sure. I believe that looking at the vehicle as a hub that connects to all aspects of life and human activity, then when you think about it from that particular perspective, there are many different opportunities and avenues to touch and to essentially overlay in different industries as far as services are concerned. The biggest challenge that the automotive industry faces is the security of the vehicle. There are many ways that artificial intelligence models can be manipulated, as well as sensors. Sensors can also be manipulated. And so there has to be robust controls and mitigation tools and strategies in place in order to ensure that whenever that happens or individuals attempt to misuse the technology, that there is a rapid response and that whatever that threat is mitigated and prevented as well from a proactive standpoint. And so that's one of the challenges that you have. You also have the real time and the connectivity challenge of, do you utilize these models in a data center and try to narrow the bandwidth and the latency as much as possible? Or do you utilize powerful onboard computational systems that essentially will increase the overall sticker price of the vehicle, yet it is what is desirable, right, by the end user as far as full automation? And so there are some challenges that have to be addressed. And it is my belief that that quantum computing essentially addresses all of these issues.
Mhm. A couple of follow-up questions. Let's maybe start with what even is quantum computing, and what on sort of a very top level are the use cases and benefits for automotive companies that you see?
So the quantum computing from a high level is looking at designing computers to solve problems the way that nature does. And so nature isn't just zeros and ones, right? Nature is a lot more dynamic and varied than that. And so what quantum computing does, it takes into account larger variabilities than just zeros and ones, right? And so due to that, you're able to essentially simulate and explore infinite possibilities that are only limited by your computational power. And so therefore, if on a classical computer that everyone's likely running, if you were able to simulate 1,000 potential ways that a pedestrian could cross the street in order to train your model, with quantum computing, you could simulate that 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 times. And so it would just increase the accuracy of your models. It would increase the safety of your vehicles, in addition to being able to decrease latency because quantum is more efficient. It takes less time to calculate the same problem. And so you're also reducing the amount of electricity that is utilized. And so if you have a vehicle, that vehicle can go further, especially if it's electric, because it's not utilizing as much energy in order to run the entire system. And so you also bring in the cybersecurity perspective, where you're able to secure the vehicle not only while it is stationary or in motion, but also during the charging and the transfer of updates as well. And also being able to protect the vehicle as it goes throughout a urban or a rural area where there are other access points and potential vulnerabilities for the vehicle. And so there are a few ways that is beneficial.
That's super interesting. Circling back a little bit to the topic of Gen AI, you mentioned that loads of the potential questions rely on choosing the right technology. And this kind of links back to the sort of age-old question of differentiation, competitive advantage. What shall we do within our organization, and where should we partner with external vendors? I was just wondering whether you've seen or could imagine any potentially good examples of where automotive companies did manage to find the right balance between doing relevant aspects of the value creation internally while relying or partnering with external vendors in other aspects that are potentially or could be considered commoditized in a way, or at least widely accessible?
So I would say that, and I would say from instead of picking out a particular automotive manufacturer, I'll just say NVIDIA. And then there are dozens of manufacturers that are tied to NVIDIA. And I say that because the automotive company can't do everything, right? They can't be everything. And especially when you're talking about very niche technologies like quantum, that if the company itself were to invest in R&D to go down that road, they would be a decade or more behind, and it would just be a waste of resources when they could actually utilize third parties to, or other organizations that are more specialized in that area. I actually believe that I saw some jobs data recently within the last 2 days where they talked about that artificial intelligence had not actually helped within organizations to increase productivity. They said that productivity gains were actually had by third parties, by contractors. Those were the individuals that were maximizing artificial intelligence and getting all of the productivity gains as a result. And so in NVIDIA's standpoint, they have the hardware stack, they have the best hardware in the world. And so it's like, well, why reinvent the wheel if in the meantime you can utilize that? What has to be done in order to compensate is to add other value for the consumer on top of what currently exists. What other services can be provided during the transition from home to work, from work to the evening spot, right? Different places like that. So there are other opportunities that are completely being missed by the automotive company to engage and to service, but to not necessarily have to provide that service yourselves, but to partner with others that can provide that service. And then the automotive company is able to make a contribution or a profit through that particular transaction. I think a great example, we are a part of a program, for example, with GM. And without going in detail, I'll say that there aren't many options for the consumer as far as applications, right? And so because of that, a person is going to their phone, and you have these other companies that are making all of this profit when they could have that same transactional experience in the vehicle, and it would probably be safer because they wouldn't have to sit there and mess with their phone if it was integrated into the vehicle and the vehicle had its own ecosystem. And I think right now, when you're having a lot of conversations about monopolies, right, that now would be a good time to think about, should we open up our ecosystem? And if you have a premium ecosystem, then there are going to be individuals that are going to, if they only have access to your ecosystem through your particular gateway, they're going to create applications specific to that particular ecosystem. And so a lot of other manufacturers are going other routes, like doing like Android Auto, etc. But then you open yourself up because you're not in control of that ecosystem, right? So if something happens, there's an outage, something like that, you're completely reliant on other individuals for your customers, as opposed to if you have more of a diversified ecosystem and individuals are using these isolated and containerized solutions, that if one application doesn't work or there's a bug in one application, that it doesn't spread to all of the applications. So there's ways to go about it to where you can do it in a very secure and efficient manner without jeopardizing the security of the vehicle or your passengers.
That is super interesting and kind of nicely leads to another point I would like to talk about around sort of business model implications of Gen AI. Automotive products are, of course, inherently physical, and how automotive companies create value has, over the past sort of 100 years, been largely unchanged. Of course, we see more and more sort of services and partnerships and value add, especially using technology these days. But what do you think could be potential business model implications sort of over the sort of medium to long term with Gen AI for automotive manufacturers?
I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in marketing. I think that's the biggest, is to how do you integrate other players to where there's more interface, right? There's more space for interfacing with the client. For example, if you get into a taxi, the taxi has all kinds of different interfaces, and they have all kinds of different advertising campaigns going on, because in order to pay that person and to pay for the gas and the insurance, right, they have to figure out other ways to essentially be able to reduce their expenses. And utilizing advertising is a very simple, straightforward way. If individuals can get within the cabin, but not only just any advertisements, making sure that they're advertisements that are relevant to them, allowing them, to bypass advertisements, not to completely turn them off, but they can bypass them. I think as long as they can bypass it without waiting a particular amount of time, I think that's a premium experience, right? And so I think without having to go too many different places and not focusing on an area where that, for example, it's harder for advertisers to utilize the internet because of the use of large language models. So if you can say, well, hey, Americans or individuals in Europe, et cetera, spend this many hours in the car, right? So we can get your product, in front of X amount of individuals, et cetera. And, 365 days a year, however you want to calculate it. So I think going at it from that particular perspective and saying, hey, we have a new platform, the partnerships with the streaming services for movies. I know that music is doing pretty bad right now. I know I think the Universal, I think their stock was down or something like that, one of the groups. And so they're looking for partnerships and different ideas for how they can get streaming music in front of a larger audience as well. And so there's opportunities if you look in the market, that I think there could be synergy and there could be things that could be done that wouldn't necessarily have to cost your organization very much. It's really just providing a platform for other organizations to utilize, and then making sure that the rules of the land are straightforward, and that it's easy for developers to interact with that ecosystem in a secure way.
That's super interesting. Talking about implications more widely, and I know lots of organizations are struggling with this at the moment, is around sort of workforce implications of GenAI. We've got, of course, quite a wide spectrum of some individuals that might have never heard about AI as a concept. And on the other side, you've got some individuals that work, especially in sort of the data science, data engineering capabilities, that work on these quite advanced GenAI use cases. I was just wondering, have you seen any good examples or recommendations in terms of how automotive companies could approach this quite wide spectrum in terms of GenAI capabilities? And is there even a need to upskill the wider organization in GenAI?
Well, definitely, we've seen that there's a need to upscale organizations and even developers and engineers. Like, you would think that developers would know how to utilize generative AI to optimize their workflow, but I haven't seen that. I've seen a lot of them don't know how to do it. And so, for example, they may not understand the whole iterative process of creating the code, spitting it out, trying it again, putting it back in, and then doing that over and over again, right? And so definitely, we've also seen that I was a part of a leadership team that created standards for artificial intelligence policies in the K through 12 school system. And they definitely need corporations to come in and say, hey, this is what we need, because otherwise they'll be all over the place, right? And you're going to have a pipeline of students and workers that learned all the wrong things. They learned how to use certain tools, but they didn't learn how to create those tools. They didn't learn how to create new systems. There's very few people now that know how to create artificial intelligence from scratch without just plugging in an API. And so that that can't be lost, right? As an art form. Quantum, right? Like if we're just plugging in AI into the schools and then the teachers are taking a deep breath after that, it's like, well, really we should be having a conversation about quantum. But we kind of see that we'll have to wait maybe a year or two to introduce that, but it should actually be introduced as soon as possible, because a lot of major technology companies are already pushing all of their chips in that direction. And the reason is because AI is so energy inefficient by itself that it needs quantum. It has to have quantum in order to run efficiently. And the reason why is because if you are truly trying to create artificial intelligence, that means it's supposed to be an embodiment of humanity and human intelligence, then humans operate on quantum. So you can't truly have artificial intelligence without integrating quantum mechanics into that. And so when you do that, it opens up a lot of possibilities. And what we see is that it also will change user interfaces and the way that individuals interact with technology, because a lot of what's computationally intensive won't be. And so you're going to be able to introduce a lot of technologies that were just in the lab, or were just on site and prototypical. And so there's also aspects of simulations and being able to bring that aspect. So creatively, what you want is you want to put the technology in people's hands and then allow them to come up with all these creative ideas and diversity of ideas based on their exposure to the technology. So it's very important. I've done coursework at MIT and Columbia with executive trying to learn robotics, trying to learn AI, including generative AI. And so, yes, they have to touch it and they have to have that training. It can't just be a subscription and everybody just gets the subscription and it's just like a tutorial. It has to be hardcore training. And also we've created apprenticeships in the United States. So I'm the lead drafter of the apprenticeships for hybrid quantum application development. And so we aren't necessarily waiting on the schools to get it together. We are industry led, where industry is saying, hey, we're going to create these apprenticeships and these are where the jobs are going to be. And then the school districts shape their curriculum and the workforce boards shape their strategies around that. And so everything is industry led, and it starts from the standards creation all the way down to making regulations and then going down into the school system. But we know that corporations are way ahead of government and civil society. And so sometimes we have to step forward in order to make sure that they're not coming down the hill with pitchforks and fire and stuff like that, because of all of the potential automation, that we integrate them in the process to where you're still going to need people to maintain these systems. You're still going to need people to correct these systems when they're wrong, and individuals that can design and create these systems, because they don't have human creativity. They can spit out ideas, but they still need humans to take it from 0 to 100. And so essentially, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the industry, and I think that organizations such as yours are optimally situated to take advantage.
In the automotive industry, I first started working in automotive maybe 10 years ago, and autonomous driving, especially around that time, was a really big topic, and everyone said, okay, it's 2-3 years away, fully autonomous, level 5 autonomous driving. And for sort of the following 5 years, it still continued to be every year 2 to 3 years away. Now it feels like, I don't know, another 5 years later, it's maybe sort of 5 to 10 years away, and we've got sort of fully autonomous driving, not fully, but in sort of geofenced areas. But it definitely feels like the initial sort of enthusiasm and optimism has at least taken a little bit of a hit. I was just wondering, looking ahead, in terms of generative AI, what do you think the future holds in terms of sort of the medium to long term in terms of 5 to 10 to 15 years in terms of big trends we might or might not see in the industry?
So I definitely believe that you're going to have generative AI that is going to be helpful from the standpoint of allowing engineers to more rapidly achieve level 5 for automation. And so also when you integrate quantum, it's going to additionally close the gaps as far as the latency issue, the issue of fusing all the data and how computationally intensive that is. And then also, I believe just making car manufacturers feel more at ease about deploying these type of technologies, knowing that you do have humans that do stupid things, right? And so the security of quantum computing, the mitigation, the real-time mitigation capabilities, and the interfacing of generative AI being able to enhance and accelerate the R&D process, I believe is going to definitely help these organizations achieve level 5. I just believe that it's truly about the people and the workers and making sure that they're empowered with this technology and understand that this is an assistant and it's making them more powerful and is bringing out superpowers within them to be more creative and more productive and to help with the overall bottom line.
That leads me nicely to my final question around recommendations for leaders. So we've got loads of leaders of GenAI strategies and organizations in the automotive context. I was just wondering if there are any particular recommendations that you would like to give to these senior leaders in automotive companies?
Absolutely. I believe that they are in a very precarious position, to be honest, because you're introducing this technology into the world, and it's going to be a lot of people's first time really interacting with the technology to begin with. But then you have to determine, well, who is going to be the person that is to blame if anything goes wrong, right? And so that is an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a conversation that has to be had. And so I believe that being able to get together with the insurance companies and figure that out as soon as possible and say, hey, if we integrate quantum computing into these vehicles and make them as secure as they possibly can be, and then we also are good stewards of the environment because we're taking on as much computational power on board as we possibly can, thus taking away electricity that is used in a data center, right? And ultimately we're saving money and resources from local communities and utilities. I think that is a huge factor, and it helps to mitigate the worries of electrifying the whole vehicle, right, in totality. And so if you are able to say, you know what, we're going to do as much as we possibly can, we're going to hold our own as much as possible and take on as much responsibility computationally from a cybersecurity standpoint, I think that, and then we're going to also open up the ecosystem that is going to create jobs, right? Like you're going to have companies that are going to do well just because they have an application that is in your vehicle, right? And so I think having that conversation of how do we create this ecosystem, right? How do we expand this ecosystem? How do we secure this ecosystem and enhance it for what is to come, right? All these different changes from a regulatory standpoint, from a technological standpoint. How do we meet that head on? And how do we become the bold company that we're known as, and not be on the tail end of it, but really embrace it because we know it's something that policyholders are invested in. We know it's something that these technology players are invested in, and we don't want them to eat, some of our lunch, right? We want all of our lunch, and essentially they're eating some of it, and we could be, having some other side meals to help with our bottom line. And so ultimately it's about opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity on the table, and I don't think they should leave anything on the table.
Positive final word. Thank you, Ian. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on your podcast today.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Fabian, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Bye.